I have seen a star die, but what happened to Lumina was 1,000 times more terrifying. I stood on the bridge of my flagship, watching the screens, and suddenly the entire capital system began to shrink. It didn't explode or shatter into pieces. It collapsed inward, as if some invisible hand were crumpling space into a ball. Planets, stations, 17 billion people, the Emperor himself, all of it folded into a single point, getting smaller and smaller. And then it simply vanished. What remained was a perfectly black hole in space, so smooth that the sensors refused to even register it. I had commanded the fleet of the Empire of Light for over 20 years and fought through 4 wars, but I had never felt so helpless. My hands shook as I tried to issue an order, but the words caught in my throat. A minute before the disappearance, a final message came through from the Imperial Dreadnought. The communications officer shouted that it was a private channel from the Emperor, intended only for me, and I heard his voice breaking into a scream. He said they were right, that the Empire should never have used the Exodus technology, that the temporal debt was too great, and the reckoning had arrived. I didn't understand a word of what he was saying about timelines and erased realities, but his fear was palpable even through the static. Then he said that only the Chronicles could fix everything, that the 7 keys had been divided, and that I had to find the others. The connection cut off mid-sentence, and the screen showed the entire system collapsing into nothingness. I stood there, staring into the void where, just a second ago, the heart of our civilization had been beating. The chaos began 10 minutes later. Admirals contacted one another, screaming, demanding explanations, blaming everything from sabotage to alien invasion to a divine curse. The fleet was falling apart right before my eyes. Princess Alara, who commanded the Science Corps, was the first to declare she was taking power and recalled her ships to the archive worlds. Prince Daxon, that hot-headed fool in control of the military shipyards, declared martial law and began pulling dreadnoughts toward his sector. 5 other heirs, each with their own ambitions and flotillas, scattered across the galaxy like shards of a broken mirror. I knew that within a week, a full-scale war would break out, because every one of them considered themselves the rightful emperor, and no one wanted to hear about any chronicles or temporal debts. I ordered my squadron to maintain neutrality and directed the ships toward the nearest border station where, according to the Emperor's final words, one of the fragments of the Exodus Chronicles might be located. My officers looked at me as if I had lost my mind, but they followed the order. As we flew through the dark void, I couldn't shake the thought that I hadn't seen the end, but the beginning of something much more terrible. The Empire of Light, which had stood for 1,000 years, collapsed in a single night. And now its wreckage was flying in all directions under the command of people who saw only the throne, but didn't understand the price that would have to be paid for it. I was a simple military man, used to following orders, but now there was no one left to give them, and it was up to me to decide the fate of what remained of humanity. I arrived at the border station 2 days after the catastrophe and immediately realized I wasn't the only one looking for answers. Princess Alara's ships were already orbiting. She had arrived first and seized all the station's scientific archives. My scouts intercepted her communications with her commanders. She was talking about ancient records and Exodus technology, and her voice carried a sense of desperation rather than a thirst for power. She had lost her entire family in Lumina and was now looking for a way to bring them back, even if it meant rewriting reality itself. I understood her pain, but I also saw the danger. Someone willing to change the past for a personal loss could destroy the future for everyone else. Alara was a brilliant scientist, but grief was clouding her judgment, making her unpredictable. Prince Daxon acted in a completely different manner. He seized the 3 largest military shipyards in the Orion sector and began churning out warships as if preparing for a full-scale war. My analysts showed me intercepted orders. He was massing a fleet, recruiting mercenaries, and buying up weapons factories. At first glance, he looked like a typical military dictator hungry for the throne, but I knew Daxon personally. I had served under him during the Outer Rim pirate campaign. He was a tough but honest officer, and his actions spoke of fear, not greed. He saw the empire falling apart and was trying to hold at least a piece of civilization together by force because he knew no other way. His tragedy was his sincere belief that only military might could save humanity from total chaos. Then Ren appeared, and everything became even more complicated. This outsider engineer, some genius from the colonial fringes, had somehow gained access to the secret experimental labs on Titan 7. No one knew how he got in, but suddenly reports started coming in about someone activating ancient prototypes and launching systems the Empire had kept under lock and key for centuries. Ren didn't command a fleet or lead an army, but his actions were even more terrifying than Daxon's military maneuvers. It was as if he knew something the rest of us didn't, and he moved with a chilling confidence. I tried to contact him, but received only a short message. He said he was looking for a way to prevent the next catastrophe, because Lumina's disappearance was only the beginning, and if the process wasn't stopped, every system would vanish in a chain reaction. I sat in my cabin, looking at the galactic map where the markers of the 7 heirs glowed, and I realized that each of them was right in their own way and wrong in another. Alara wanted to bring back the past, Daxon was trying to control the present, Ren sought to save the future, and the other 4 heirs were caught between these extremes, seizing trade routes, communication systems, and industrial worlds. None of them wanted war. I could see it in their actions, their attempts to negotiate, and their doubts. But each believed that only their path was the right one, and that certainty was inevitably leading to a collision. I was just an admiral without an empire, but I had to find a way to unite these people before their good intentions turned the galaxy into a scorched wasteland. Everything changed when Alara activated an ancient beacon at that very border station. My sensors detected a massive energy surge, and I ordered the squadron to drop out of hyperspace at those coordinates immediately. When we arrived, we saw something incredible. A giant holographic projection hovered over the ruins of the station, so bright it eclipsed the surrounding stars. Alara's ship sat frozen in awe, and I understood why. The projection showed people in strange clothing, clearly from another era, their faces distorted by fear and desperation. I ordered a recording of everything they said because I felt it. This was a message from the founders of the Empire themselves, people we considered almost like gods. They had created the greatest civilization in human history, and now they were warning us from the past about something horrific. I listened to their words through the bridge speakers, and with every passing second, my blood ran colder. The founders spoke of temporal resonance, of the fact that hyperspace jump technology doesn't work the way we thought it did. They explained that every time a ship jumps, it literally carves a piece out of the fabric of reality, erasing alternate timelines where events had unfolded differently. Over 1,000 years, the Empire had made trillions of jumps, colonizing the galaxy in a century instead of millennia. And all that time, we were accumulating what they called a temporal debt. Lumina's disappearance wasn't an accident. It was a reckoning, a debt collection, and it was only the first installment. The founders said they had foreseen this and tried to stop it, but it was already too late, and the only way to prevent the total extinction of humanity was to find the Exodus Chronicles and use them correctly. When the projection faded, I sat in my command chair, unable to move. Everything I believed in, everything I had fought for, the greatness of the Empire, our rapid conquest of the galaxy, humanity's technological triumph, all of it was built on the bones of erased realities. We hadn't discovered hyperspace, we had stolen it from an extinct civilization and paid for it with the blood of worlds that never existed but should have. I thought of the billions of people in Lumina who vanished in a single night and realized they weren't victims of chance, but the price of our sins. Alara contacted me immediately afterward, and the desperation in her voice was gone, replaced by cold resolve. She said she now understood what had to be done and that we had to find the remaining fragments of the Chronicles at any cost, because if we didn't stop the resonance, not just the Empire, but all of humanity would vanish. It all fell apart 6 hours later when Alara intercepted an encrypted transmission from Daxon. Her decryption specialists worked fast, and she immediately forwarded the recording to me. The prince was contacting his commanders, speaking about the Exodus Chronicles and access code fragments, revealing that each of the 7 heirs carried a part of the key without even knowing it. Daxon was ordering his men to begin hunting the other claimants, to capture them dead or alive, and extract the codes by any means necessary. Alara didn't keep the information secret. She broadcast the recording to all the heirs simultaneously, and that decision turned a tense standoff into an outright slaughter. Now, everyone knew that a fragment of the key to humanity's survival was hidden inside their own heads or implants, and that the other 6 would be hunting them until their last breath. The race began immediately, and I found myself right at the center of it. My analysts mapped out the likely locations of the remaining chronicle fragments based on the Emperor's final words and the data from the holographic recording. 3 major archives, 2 research centers, a military base on the fringe, and an abandoned shipyard in the dead zone. All of these points suddenly became targets for 7 different fleets. Space battles didn't start as spectacular clashes with laser volleys and explosions, but as long, grueling games of chess. Fleets maneuvered for days, trying to gain a tactical advantage, cut off enemy supply lines, or block hyperspace corridors. I ordered my squadron toward the nearest archive on the planet Cassiopeia 9, but I already knew that Daxon had dispatched 3 dreadnoughts there, and one of the junior heirs had mined every approach to the system. Every decision became a matter of life and death. I calculated trajectories, analyzed the enemy's possible maneuvers, and tried to anticipate their next moves, all while feeling the sands of time slip through my fingers. We lost 2 cruisers attempting to break through the minefield at Cassiopeia. The explosions were silent in the vacuum of space, but the screams of the crews over the comms haunted me every night. Daxon blocked 3 of the 5 hyperspace corridors in the sector, forcing everyone into massive flanking maneuvers that added days to the journey. The junior heirs formed and dissolved alliances, making deals and betraying one another, and with each passing day, the situation grew more chaotic. I realized that if we continued fighting like this, we wouldn't gather the chronicles before the next disappearance. Ren changed everything with an unexpected proposal. He opened a broadcast and spoke directly to Alara, suggesting a temporary alliance. His logic was simple and brutally accurate. None of us would survive alone, because while we were fighting over fragments, the temporal resonance would erase several more systems. Ren stated that his calculations predicted the next disappearance in 3 weeks, and if we didn't assemble the chronicles by then, there would be nothing left to save. Alara agreed almost immediately, and I realized I had no choice. I either joined their alliance or became a target for everyone else. I gave my consent, though, deep down, I knew this union was as fragile as glass, liable to shatter at any moment from disagreements, ambition, or the simple desperation of people who had lost everything and were clinging to a final hope. We found the first fragment of the Chronicles in the abandoned archive on Cassiopeia 9 after 3 days of constant maneuvering and 1 brief but bloody skirmish with the fleet of a junior heir who tried to beat us to it. The fragment was a crystalline structure about the size of a human fist, pulsing with a strange inner light. When Ren connected it to the ship's computer, the system nearly crashed from the sheer volume of data flooding from the artifact. I stood on the bridge and watched the screens as a story unfolded that we were never taught in the academy. The founders of the Empire weren't brilliant pioneers who cracked the secrets of hyperspace through intellect and persistence. They were thieves who stumbled upon the technology of a dead civilization and claimed it as their own, never understanding the true price of what they had stolen. The data revealed everything in horrifying detail. Every hyperspace jump made by any Imperial ship had literally incinerated alternate timelines. In those realities, events had unfolded differently. Perhaps the wars we started never happened, or the colonies we built never existed, but there were other people, other stories, other fates. Throughout the thousand-year existence of the Empire, we had made trillions of jumps, erasing countless potential futures, all while a temporal debt accumulated. The dead civilization from which we stole the technology likely faced this same problem and perished trying to solve it. Lumina's disappearance was not an accidental catastrophe. It was a debt collection, the first payment for centuries of reckless use of stolen technology. I looked at the figures on the screen and realized the next disappearance would be even more massive. Alara screamed when she saw the full data. She realized that all her attempts to bring back Lumina were futile. You cannot recover what was erased as payment for a debt. Furthermore, any attempt to manipulate time would only accelerate the subsequent disappearances. Ren remained silent, but I saw his face go pale. His calculations had been too optimistic. We didn't have 3 weeks. We had 10 days at most before the next catastrophe, which would erase an entire sector rather than just a single system. We gathered for an emergency meeting over a secure channel, and for the first time, there were no mutual accusations or attempts to manipulate one another. We simply sat there, looking at each other, knowing we faced a choice that would determine the fate of all humanity. Ren was the first to voice what we were all thinking. We could try to use the completed Exodus Chronicles to restore the Empire and continue living as we had before, but that would mean taking on an even greater temporal debt that would eventually destroy us completely. Or we could allow the debt to be paid naturally, abandon hyperspace technology, and accept that humanity might shrink to a few isolated systems, but survive. Alara argued that this was equivalent to civilizational suicide, that billions would die in the process of the reckoning. I listened to their debate and thought of the 17 billion on Lumina, of the family I lost that night, and I realized that any choice would be a betrayal of either the past or the future, and one of us would have to live with that burden for the rest of our days. We found the second fragment of the Chronicles at an ancient research station in the Andromeda Prima system, and that was when our fragile alliance began to fray at the seams. Ilara and Ren worked together to decrypt the data, and I saw their expressions grow darker by the hour. When they finished, a silence so heavy hung between them that I immediately knew something had gone wrong. The second fragment contained more than just information. It held an active protocol, a way to use the Chronicles to manipulate time. Alara stared at the screen with an expression as if she had seen a path to saving everyone she had lost. Ren, however, recoiled from the console as if it were something poisonous. I stood between them and felt the air in the command center grow increasingly tense, charged with an impending conflict that threatened to tear us apart. Alara spoke first, and her voice carried such passion, such desperate hope, that it was painful for me to listen to her. She said the protocol allowed them to roll back time, to prevent the disappearance of Lumina, and to bring back all those billions of lives that had been erased. She talked about her younger sister, who had just entered the Imperial Academy and dreamed of becoming an astronavigator. About her parents, who were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary the very day the system vanished. About her fiancé, who worked at the fleet's Central Coordination Center and died before he could even understand what was happening. Her voice trembled as she said she couldn't just accept their deaths as inevitable when she had a chance to fix everything, and she was obligated to take it. I saw the tears on her face and understood her pain, because I too had lost people I loved in Lumina. Ren stood up and looked at her with an expression that mixed sympathy and horror. He explained that the protocol didn't work like a simple time machine. It overwrote reality, destroying the current timeline and replacing it with a new one. All of us standing here and now would simply cease to exist, because in the new reality, we would have never been. Alara and her family would be alive, but this version of Alara, the one who survived the catastrophe, fought, searched for the Chronicles, and suffered, would vanish without a trace. Ren argued that this wasn't salvation, but suicide by replacing oneself with an alternate version, and that we had no right to erase the billions of people who survived Lumina's disappearance and continued to live, hope, and fight. His logic was flawless, but I saw Alara looking at him with growing fury because to her, it wasn't logic. It was a refusal to save her family. Their argument escalated into a full-blown conflict right before my eyes. Alara screamed that Ren was just a coward hiding behind philosophy to avoid making hard decisions. Ren countered that she was blinded by grief and ready to destroy all of humanity for the sake of a personal loss. I tried to intervene to stop them, but they were both right in their own way, and that made the situation even worse. Alara had the right to want her loved ones back, the right not to resign herself to their deaths. Ren had the right to protect the existing reality and the people living in it. I stood between two people I trusted and realized that our alliance was falling apart, that in a few hours we might start shooting at each other, and that I had no answer to the question of who was right. The only thing I knew for sure was that we had almost no time left for reflection, and the next disappearance would erase another sector while we stood here arguing over philosophy and morals. We jumped through the anomaly zone near the dead star because it was the only way to outrun Daxon's fleet and reach the third fragment before him. The navigator warned me that the scanners showed strange distortions in that region, residual effects from old hyperspace jumps that had overlapped for hundreds of years. I didn't listen because we had no time for caution. Every second of delay meant Daxon might seize the fragment first, and then our alliance with Alara and Ren would collapse completely. When the ship entered hyperspace, I felt that something had gone wrong. Usually a jump feels like slight dizziness, but this time a wave of such intense nausea hit me that I nearly lost consciousness. The screens began to flicker, showing impossible images, and I heard the crew's screams over the comms. When I raised my head and looked at the bridge, I saw him, another me, standing at the command console, but wearing the uniform of the Imperial Secret Police, with a cold, cruel expression I had never seen in a mirror. The Spectre looked at me with such contempt that I felt physical pain, and I realized this was me from another timeline, one that had been erased by our hyperspace jumps. He didn't speak, but I heard his thoughts. I felt his memories as if they were leaking directly into my brain. In that reality, I wasn't a fleet admiral, but a hangman for the regime, a man who tortured and killed in the name of imperial stability. I saw his hands covered in the blood of the innocent. I heard the screams of the people he interrogated in the basements of secret prisons. This ghost was a monster, and the most terrifying part was that I understood every decision he made, every step that led him down that path. He had chosen order over justice, power over mercy, and at some point, he stopped seeing the difference between protecting people and destroying them. I closed my eyes, trying to rid myself of the vision, but it wouldn't fade. It only grew brighter and more detailed, and I felt my stomach churn with horror at what I could have become. Chaos erupted throughout the ship, and I heard the crew's screams over the comms. Engineer Marcus was yelling that he saw himself selling blueprints to enemy agents for money, betraying the Empire for personal gain. Navigator Lisa was sobbing, describing a version of herself who became a junkie and died in the slums of some colonial station. Alara contacted me via a secure channel, her voice trembling with terror. She saw herself as a tyrant empress who used the chronicles to rewrite reality, turning surviving humanity into a totalitarian nightmare where people were afraid even to think the wrong thoughts. Ren was silent, but I saw his face on the screen, pale as death, and I knew he was facing his own ghosts as well. The ship groaned under the strain. Sensors showed we were stuck between layers of reality, and if we didn't break free in the next few minutes, we would stay here forever, locked away with the ghosts of our alternate fates. I forced myself to open my eyes and look at the Spectre again, at this monster with my face, and suddenly I realized something vital. He was real. He had existed in that erased timeline, made his choices, and lived with the consequences. But I am not him. Because in my reality, I made different decisions, chose a different path, and that made me a human being, not a machine for following orders. The ghosts didn't show what we would become, but what we could have been if we had turned the wrong way at a critical moment. I ordered the entire crew to stop being afraid and to just look at their alternate versions, to accept them as part of infinite possibilities. When we all did that, when we stopped turning away from the horror of our potential mistakes, the ship tore itself out of the anomaly and dropped into normal space. The ghosts vanished, but their lesson remained. Humanity is strong, not because it doesn't make mistakes, but because it is capable of looking at them, being horrified, and still moving forward, choosing every time to be better than it might have been. We all gathered at the Exodus gate 8 days after the jump through the anomaly, and I still remember how my breath caught at the sight of that ancient megastructure. A massive ring encircling a black hole, glowing with a strange light that seemed to emanate not from the stars, but from the fabric of space-time itself. 7 fleets hung in space, far enough from each other to maneuver, but not far enough for safety. One wrong move, and a slaughter would begin that would destroy humanity's last hopes. I stood on the bridge of my flagship, watching the screens where the markers of Daxon's, Alara's, and Wren's ships, along with those of the 4 junior heirs, were glowing. My hands were sweaty, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. But instead of an order to open fire, I received a message from Wren. He proposed meeting on neutral ground on one of the gate's ancient platforms for negotiations. I couldn't believe my eyes because after everything that had happened, after the battles and betrayals, the idea of peace talks seemed like madness. Daxon was the first to agree, and that shocked me more than anything. This man, who was ready to tear the galaxy apart for the sake of power, suddenly accepted a proposal for dialogue. Alara followed suit, then the junior heirs, one after another, and an hour later we were all sitting in an ancient hall on the gate platform at a round table that perhaps remembered the founders of the Empire. The atmosphere was so tense that the air felt thick, like water. Each of us kept a hand on our weapon. Everyone knew that at any moment someone could snap and start shooting. But we sat in silence, looking at one another. And I realized this was the most important moment in human history since the disappearance of Lumina. Wren spoke first, suggesting that everyone voice their vision for the future and explain what they planned to do with the Exodus Chronicles if they gained full access to them. His voice was calm, but I heard a steely resolve in it. He had no intention of backing down from his principles. Daxon stood up and began to speak of a military dictatorship, of an iron fist that was the only thing capable of holding a crumbling civilization back from total chaos. He spoke of order and discipline, that freedom without control turns into anarchy, and anarchy kills more people than any tyranny. His words sounded logical and persuasive, and I saw some of the junior heirs nodding in agreement. Daxon spoke of fleets that would patrol every system, of laws that would be enforced without exception, and of strict control over technology so that no one could ever abuse the Chronicles again. He promised stability, security, and order, and a fire of sincere belief burned in his eyes. Belief that this was the only way to save humanity. I listened to him and thought about how many tyrants in history began with the same good intentions, only to end with concentration camps and mass executions. But I also understood his fear, because I had seen for myself how quickly civilization slides into chaos without a strong hand. Alara spoke next, her voice trembling with emotion as she described a plan to restore the old order. She wanted to use the Chronicles to return the Empire to the state it was in before the catastrophe, not by changing the past entirely, but by rebuilding the structures, laws, and traditions that had held humanity together for 1,000 years. Alara spoke of culture, science, and art, that the Empire was not just a machine of suppression, but the cradle of humanity's greatest achievements. She promised to bring back stability not through military force, but through the restoration of institutions that people understood and trusted. Her plan sounded softer and more humane than Daxon's, but I saw the same danger in it. She wanted to resurrect the dead, to bring back a system that had already proven its failure by leading to the catastrophe. Ren stood up and harshly countered them both. He spoke of abandoning all forbidden technologies, of returning to a slow, natural development, and of taking responsibility for the sins of the past by renouncing stolen power. His words cut to the bone because he was asking humanity to voluntarily give up the stars, to confine itself to a few systems and live modestly and honestly without debt to erased realities. The tension in the hall grew with every word, and I realized we were standing on the brink of not a physical battle, but a war of ideas that could be even more destructive. Ren activated the full Exodus Chronicles right there in the negotiation hall, and I immediately realized he did it without warning on purpose, so that no one would have time to interfere or try to seize control. The ancient technology came to life with such a hum that the platform walls shook, and suddenly holographic projections appeared before each of us, showing not the past, but the future, all the possible variants of what would happen depending on our choice. I saw Daxon's path, an iron military dictatorship that indeed restored order for the first decades, built new fleets, strengthened borders, and gave people security and stability. But then, 50 years later, I saw rebellions suppressed with incredible cruelty, millions executed for dissent, and entire planets turned into prisons. And 100 years later, a new catastrophe, because the military machine Daxon built continued to use the forbidden technologies even more aggressively, accumulating an even greater temporal debt that eventually destroyed not just one system, but half of the inhabited galaxy. Alara's path looked softer, more humane, and at first glance, it seemed like salvation. I saw a restored empire, shining capitals, thriving colonies, and a rebirth of culture and science. People were happy, living in comfort and security. The empire had once again become a beacon of civilization. But the chronicles showed further, and I saw how 80 years later, that very same system, built on the same principles, led to catastrophe once more. Alara had restored not only the good, but all the structural problems of the old empire: corruption, inequality, and the abuse of technology. The temporal debt continued to accumulate because the reborn civilization continued to use hyperspace jumps as recklessly as before. I saw Alara's face as she watched these projections. I saw her hopes crumble as she realized that resurrecting the dead would not save the future, but only delay the inevitable. Her path was a beautiful lie that offered a century of illusion but ended in the same result: total annihilation. Ren's path showed survival, but at what cost? Humanity abandoned hyperspace technology, confining itself to a few dozen systems reachable only by slow sublight ships. The temporal debt indeed stopped growing, the catastrophe ceased, and civilization continued to exist. But I saw how 200 years later, the isolated systems began to war with one another over resources, and how humanity slowly devolved, losing knowledge, technology, and culture. 500 years later, people lived in a few scattered worlds at odds with each other, having forgotten their common origin. It wasn't a sudden extinction, but a slow, agonizing death of a civilization stretched over centuries. Ren looked at the projection of his future with an expression of such pain that I felt sorry for him. He wanted to save humanity by accepting responsibility for its sins, but his path meant giving up the stars, giving up the dream that had driven our species from the very beginning. I realized that all three paths led to defeat, some fast, some slow, but all inevitable. Then a junior heir spoke, a boy of about 14 named Terran, who had survived on an abandoned station and whom we had hardly taken seriously until that moment. He looked at the projections of all three paths and said something that overturned my entire understanding of the situation. Terran said that we were all looking for a ready-made solution, trying to choose one of the offered variants, but the real choice was to create a fourth path, one that wasn't in the projections yet. He proposed taking responsibility for the past, not through self-punishment and the rejection of progress, but through building a new, honest society. Not an empire with an emperor at the top, not a military dictatorship, but a federation of equal worlds where every system has a voice, where decisions are made not by one person, but by everyone together. Taryn spoke of using technology cautiously, with an understanding of its price, and of gradually paying off the temporal debt by limiting jumps and searching for alternative ways to travel. His words sounded naive, childishly simple, but when the chronicles began to calculate this fourth path, I saw something incredible. A future where humanity truly survived, learned, and grew, accepting its mistakes and becoming stronger. I looked at the other heirs and saw in their eyes the same realization. The outsider boy had found the answer that all of us combined could not. 10 years have passed since that day at the Exodus Gate, and I am standing on the bridge of the research vessel, New Dawn, looking at the star map of the Union of Free Worlds, unable to believe we actually did it. The 7 heirs, who could have torn the galaxy apart, became the founders of a federation where every world has an equal voice and decisions are made by consensus, not commands. Daxon took charge of the Unified Defense Forces, but they now report not to one man, but to a council of representatives from all systems. Ilara leads the science department and the expedition I am currently escorting. We are looking for a way to pay off the temporal debt and restore the erased realities without harming our own. Ren became the chief technological regulator, ensuring we use hyperspace jumps only when absolutely necessary while developing alternative engines. We sealed the Exodus Chronicles in a special vault on a neutral station where all 7 of us have access simultaneously, as a reminder of the price a civilization pays for its ambitions and as a warning to future generations. We have been flying for 8 months toward the edge of explored space, following strange signals detected by our long-range probes. Ilara is certain these signals are linked to the very same extinct civilization from which the Empire's founders stole hyperspace technology 1,000 years ago. Every day, she spends hours analyzing data, trying to understand how to restore the erased timelines, how to bring back what we destroyed with our jumps. This has become her personal mission, a way to atone for nearly destroying all of humanity just to bring back her family. I see how she has changed over these years. Her hardness and desperation have been replaced by calm resolve. She no longer tries to change the past. She works to fix the future. Sometimes at night, I sit in my cabin and think about how close we came to total annihilation, how easily we could have chosen any of those 3 paths that led to nowhere. We survived only because one boy proved to be wiser than all of us combined. This morning, the sensors detected a powerful, directed signal from the system we were heading toward. Ilara immediately sounded the alarm, and we dropped out of hyperspace at a safe distance from the source. What we saw made me forget how to breathe. A giant megastructure, hundreds of times larger than the Exodus Gate, surrounded an entire star, and its entire surface glowed with a living light, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed almost organic. Our scanners showed the impossible. The structure had been built millions of years ago, yet it was still functioning, still waiting. With trembling hands, Ilara activated the communication system, and we began to receive a message. The voice that spoke through the speakers was strange and multi-layered, as if thousands of beings were speaking simultaneously. Yet it was in clear human language. They introduced themselves as the Guardians, the remnants of a civilization that had reached the pinnacle of development and moved beyond material existence millions of years ago, leaving this structure as a test for younger races. The Guardians said that the technology stolen by our empire's founders was exactly that, a test. They had intentionally left it accessible to see how a young civilization would handle power that could destroy it. Most races failed this test, destroying themselves by abusing the stolen power, but some passed by making the choice we made at the Exodus Gate. The voice said that we had passed the trial. We had proven that humanity is capable of learning from its mistakes, making hard decisions, and choosing wisdom over power. They said the erased timelines could be restored, that the temporal debt could be paid, and that they would teach us how to do it. I will remember the last words they spoke for the rest of my days. Welcome to the galactic community. You are no longer alone in the universe. I stood on the bridge, looking at this incredible structure surrounded by stars, and felt tears streaming down my face. Humanity triumphed not because we were stronger, faster, or smarter than others, but because at the critical moment, we chose to be better than we could have been. We chose the right path, and now the entire galaxy opened before us, not as a battlefield, but as a home we would share with those who had walked the same path before us.